1.
Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Jason Walker, joined by Dalton Renshaw. As always, we've been here all week in Las Vegas, covering the Mountain West Tournament Championships, or whatever they're called. I think I just doubled up on adjectives there. But we're here probably about a mile off at least the main part of the strip. I think technically the strip is right over here, but you can kind of see in the background we've got...
Right behind our shoulders.
Yeah, we've got all the fun stuff back there, though we've certainly been over there. We filmed our last one pretty much over there in scenic Paris, Las Vegas. But a couple days ago, we had Utah State women. They played what may be their last game of the season. They lost to Wyoming. It was 64-41. Dalton, what went wrong there?
Well, what happened in the first game is, Colorado State didn't shoot the ball very well. And kind of on the flip side, Wyoming came out extremely hot in that game. They ended up shooting 7 for 10 in the first half of the first quarter, and ended up being up 18-9 really quick. And it just was too much for Utah State to counter at that point. Yeah,
really outside of those first couple of minutes, the game wasn't competitive. Like I said, Wyoming came out to that 18-9 lead, and they ended up leading, I think, 52-26 or something to that effect, where they had double of Utah State's points in like the third quarter. Which if you're doubled up at that point, then you're in real trouble.
It's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, and they didn't. Unfortunately they lost, and like we said, it could be their last game of the season. There is a possibility that they play in some postseason tournament. It won't be the NCAA tournament, obviously. They couldn't secure that bid with a surprise run. But there are a few low-level tournaments which, as we've heard, the team is interested in, depending on location and depending on what may work for them. So you could see the women back in action one or two more times, depending on how well they might do in one of those tournaments. But it is possible that the season is over. And for the two seniors, unfortunately, Rachel Brewster and Deja Mason.
Yeah, and just to touch on that a little bit, one thing that we really look forward to going into the game was having some more contributions. And we really didn't see that, and especially from a girl like Rachel Brewster, who didn't play very well in that game. And, she was asked, Eliza West was asked after the game how much this meant to, go out like this for the seniors. And, she got a little emotional because this wasn't, the best showing for the Aggies. But to be able to have another chance to, play a game, go out on the right way, maybe get a win, I think is what this team really needs to move forward next year, where they do have some good talent coming back.
Yeah, I think especially because this team really grew together. You could tell, like you said, Eliza West getting a little emotional. I think this team, they bonded a little more this season. I think they took a lot of effort to building some chemistry over the summer. They went on some trips, to different parts of Utah, I believe, and really trying to bond as a team. And I think they did that, and it kind of showed with how this team really plays for each other.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so moving on, the men, the Utah State men will be getting underway tomorrow. They will play, as we found out earlier today, they'll be playing New Mexico.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news as of like 2 hours ago of this filming. New Mexico beat Wyoming. They beat them, I forget the score, 78-68. Oh, you had the score memorized.
Yeah, 78-68. You got it.
I got it eventually because I write things down. But that was an interesting game because early on, Wyoming led by 16 points at one point.
Yeah.
And then just kind of the end of the half, New Mexico built some momentum, and then they just broke it open in the second half, ended up winning by double digits, a game where they trailed by 16. That's quite the swing.
It was an amazing swing, especially because, you come out second half, and they were really flat in that first half. Justin James played a great half. He had 14 points, even though he kind of slowed down towards the end of the half. But, yeah, it was really like what Wyoming was doing in the first half was what New Mexico ended up doing in the second half, and played really, really aggressive. And we saw that run that Vance Jackson went on, where he scored 13 straight points for the Lobos, and ended up going on a 15-0 run total, I believe it was. And yeah, so towards the end of the half, it really became a dominant game for New Mexico, which really was tough to believe when you saw Wyoming play so dominant in the first half.
Yeah, I was getting ready to tweet out, like, Aggie fans, we're going to be playing Wyoming and upset happening. And I held off because I was like, it's the first half, or like, maybe it's early second half. And good thing I didn't say that, because I would have looked foolish. About as foolish as I did, unfortunately, for picking the women to win a couple days
very
ago.
Close either. So.
no, that's what I get for being optimistic, I guess, or just too forward-thinking.
Yeah, a little confidence in the team.
Yeah, but you mentioned Vance Jackson. He had that 13-0 run. That was half his points. He had 26 on the day. He also added 8 rebounds, 5 assists. Real all-around guy. Yeah. And even Coach Smith, when we interviewed him shortly afterwards, we heard him talk about Vance Jackson. He's I think when they first played him, or they played him a couple of times before in the regular season. He brought up Vance Jackson a couple of times. He's got that length. He's got the scoring ability. And it'll be an interesting matchup because, as Coach Smith said, he's a bit of a tweener.
Yeah.
That's can be a bad thing, but in college it's not so much because it can cause matchup problems if you aren't able to guard him defensively.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what they did really well in the first 2 matchups. They limited it to only 21 points combined in the first 2 matchups. And a guy who really got off was Anthony Mathis, but he played pretty poorly tonight, only having 5 points. So I think, like you're saying, Utah State having the ability to defend in many ways, being one of the best, if not the best, defensive team in the conference, with so much length of their own. You have guys like Justin Bean. You have obviously the Defensive Player of the Year, Numes Keita. So I think, as tough of a matchup it might be for New Mexico coming into Utah State has the pieces to counter that, in my opinion.
So one thing I'm curious to know your thoughts on, and it came up in the interviews, with Sam Merrill and with Coach Smith, is by the time that Utah State tips off tomorrow, they'll have had 9 days of rest. And there's always this question, rest versus rust.
Sure.
New Mexico's already got a game under their belts in the UNLV arena. And Utah State actually didn't play at UNLV this season, just the way the conference works. They didn't play UNLV on the road. They hosted UNLV, so they've played them.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to meet them, but that wasn't relevant, super. But they haven't played in this arena. They went through a shoot-around today in a bit of practice, but do you think that impacts them? There's a possibility for some rust, because we've seen it with other teams. We saw it with the women's teams, and even New Mexico and Wyoming, you could say they really started out rough offensively. Do you think there'll be a bit of a disadvantage with Utah State there? That's
a really interesting question, and it's something that I think we're just going to have to see how they come out maybe in the first 10 minutes or so. But what I'm really curious about is that Sam Merrill had that, really, really hot run towards the end of the season, averaging 29 points in the last 4 games. And, for a shooter where you want to try to stay in rhythm as much as you can, to have that many days off, I'm really curious to see if, the first 4 or 5 shots are going to fall for him. And, the one thing with Sam Merrill is that he always does a good job at making his own shots, creating his own opportunities. But maybe for other guys like Brock Miller, if they're, maybe a little bit too much rest, that might end up hindering their performance, in my opinion. Yeah, I know Brock Miller, a person who's really struggled. Sam Merrill obviously really went off at the end of the year. Last 4 games, he averaged 29.5 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, and a few assists. So I think he'll probably be okay, like you said. But yeah, Brock Miller, he struggled so much. I think he was shooting a little over 20%. For a shooter like him, that could be really rough. But but if he manages to, make the first couple of shots, I think that could end up making the difference in a win or a loss. If the team as a whole struggles, maybe if they get something from Brock Miller or even Sam Merrill. And a good thing for Utah State, even if that does happen, say they don't come out shooting very well, they're really good inside the post. Obviously, you have Numes Keita, you have Quinn Taylor, who played well against New Mexico last time out. And on the other side of the court, New Mexico only ranks 7th in the conference in shooting as a whole. So chances are it's probably not going to end up being a shootout. So I kind of still like Utah State's chances, even if they don't play their best in that aspect of the game. Yeah, and I think you brought this up, their defense, Utah State's defense. That is something that comes up in these tournaments where both teams might struggle offensively. That just kind of happens in these tournaments, these postseason tournaments. But if you can defend better, and then maybe have a player like Sam Merrill, Mountain West Player of the Year. Yeah. If he can get a few shots, that one player is able to make the difference, then I think Utah State could pretty easily come away with the win. And they beat New Mexico twice in the regular season, so hopefully it'll turn out well enough. But kind of on that note, what do you think is the biggest key for Utah State in this game to come away with the win? Well, we touched on it a little bit with Vance Jackson, them kind of stifling him in the first 2 matchups. But you have another guy like Carlton Bragg who plays really well in the post as well. And so I think if Utah State can limit the points in the paint, which they've done pretty well all year, and New Mexico, not being a very well shooting team, I think that's really going to ignite them because they play so well when they can get those defensive stops and lead that to their transition offense. I think that's really going to be the key for them. Yeah, and I think you really saw that in that second half against Wyoming, getting those points in the paint. They had a couple of dunks and Vance Jackson, obviously. Yeah. So, and that really helped them when they weren't able to get those shots because Anthony Mathis had a pretty quiet game, as you said. The one thing that I'm going to point out, this actually kind of almost calls back to last year's Mountain West tournament because Utah State lost to the Lobos in the semifinal, the kind of surprise visit to the semifinal. Yeah. But they had a lot of turnovers, mostly because of something we saw from New Mexico today where they pressed. Yes.
They haven't done it as much this year. I don't know how many of you have watched New Mexico. I haven't really watched them, but they pressed a lot today, and it was in the post-game press conferences that they hadn't run it nearly as much.
Yeah.
But it worked really well against Wyoming. You saw Wyoming really struggle against that press, some quick turnovers.
16 total in the game.
Yeah, and they led to easy points for New Mexico, and you mentioned those transition points. And last year, Utah State really struggled against the press, and a lot of turnovers, and that ultimately led them to lose the game. So I think the big key here is Utah State not turning the ball over. Don't give them free possessions, because in a game where it might be low scoring and it'll be tough to come by points, just handing away scoring opportunities is going to really hurt you no matter how good you are defensively.
Definitely, and I think this is going to be just like maybe how we saw in the New Mexico-Wyoming game, where you're going to have to be in the game. You're not going to be able to give any team slack, especially in the Mountain West tournament, and I think that's why it's going to be so important, like you say, to limit those turnovers and to kind of maybe take that on the other side where they're also really good at forcing their own turnovers. I know they've had a couple games to end the season where Diogo Brito made some really key steals, and other guys on the team, Sam Merrill. So I think that's going to be definitely something to look out for.
All right, so let's wrap this up. We're going to talk predictions. We'll see if I can nail mine a little better. You got yours right last time.
Somewhat.
I'll go ahead and go first this time. I've made him go first, so I'll put myself on the spot. I'm going to say it's going to be a low scoring. I think, like we said, I think Utah State is going to end up scoring 69 points, and then New Mexico will score 58. So I'm going to go with 69-58. Pretty low scoring game, defensive, but I think Utah State will pull off some runs in the second half that will ultimately seal the game.
I really like that prediction. I think, like you say, it's going to be pretty close. I think it will be in that somewhere around 60 range. I'm going to go with, I'm thinking 65-52. I don't have quite as much confidence in New Mexico scoring offensively, but yeah, I don't think it's going to be really much of a blowout either way. Yeah.
All right, so that's it. Now, for the game, you can listen to it on Aggie Radio 92.3 KBLU LP in Logan, so you can check that out. Scotty G is going to be on the call. That'll do it for us here. I'm Jason Walker, joined by Dalton Renshaw as always. Talk to you later.
See ya.